All right, thanks everyone for joining us today. We're going to get started with how to turn great candidates into great employees. Just some housekeeping bits. We will be sending out the recording and slides afterwards, so if you have to drop off at any point, don't worry about that. We also have a question box on your right-hand side. You should see that. Please feel free to ask any questions during the webinar. Don't hold them all to the end. That way it'll just make it easier for us to go through. And without further ado, Scott is going to kick it off.
Awesome, thanks, Erin. And thank you all for joining on this discussion on how to turn great candidates into great employees. And that's the struggle that we have in talent acquisition, right? Where we find that awesome candidate, they interview very well, they go to the hiring manager's floored by the talent that we brought them and say, we gotta get this person an offer. We give them the offer and they say yes, then they accept the offer, we're so excited. And then the person shows up half-hearted on day one and they leave after 3 months. Or worse yet, they don't even show up for day one, they ghost you for the first day. So what are we going to do? So we're going to talk about some tips that my co-host here and I are going to go through. If you're a note taker, make sure that you're ready to take some notes because we're going to give you some very specific ideas that you can go through. So let's go ahead and let's walk into our roadmap. So our roadmap is we're going to introduce ourselves. My speaker, Samantha, and I are going to introduce ourselves, but we're going to identify the challenges in onboarding. Then we're going to cover the connection that you make with the candidate and how you turn that into an employee, how you bridge that gap. We're going to talk about laying out ideas that you can actually act on to transition that person, make an awesome transition from candidate to active, productive employee. And then we're going to talk about the questions and answers at the very end. So make sure you're on the whole time putting questions into that question box so we can answer specifically what you are wondering about during the session. All right, time for intros. So I am joined by a great mind. She has some very awesome ideas. I've been having the pleasure of working with Samantha, who's also one of our partners at Workable. So Samantha, why don't you go ahead and give us a little background on yourself and what you're going to be sharing on today.
Sure, thanks, Scott. Hi, I'm Samantha. I head up sales enablement and corporate onboarding here at Workable. That means I help new hires and existing employees alike find success at every stage of change. But in simpler terms, I just see myself as a project manager who focuses on training and onboarding.
Awesome. And I'm Scott Paschal. I have about 15 years in HR. I'm the Vice President of Sales here at Clickboarding. I spent 10 years at ADP. I spent 2.5 years at Thomson Reuters where I was doing an onboarding function. So I'd onboard about 30 to 40 associates into the two divisions that I covered. So I've lived the onboarding life. I'm going to give you some tips that I've had over my experience, some tips of the current clients I'm working with, what they're saying, what they're seeing, and items that they're putting in place. So before we get into any of the learning points, let's go ahead and warm everybody up here with a quick poll. So it's going to be interactive. So let's answer this question. We're going to put up the polls. How many of you have lost candidates because you are waiting for offers to be approved or for the paperwork to get done? So go ahead and answer that question. You should be able to answer that poll is, have you lost candidates because you were waiting for offers to be approved or for the paperwork to get done? Samantha, has that ever happened to you?
It has happened to me personally because I'm on the HR side, but I have heard of it happening quite a few times.
Right, and I've had it happen a couple times where we couldn't get the offer out to them in time, and another offer came in, and they decided to take that offer instead, and it was at day late, dollar short. But you know, now the economy is people are getting multiple offers, right? So people are holding off and saying yes.
That's so true, especially when you're in a highly competitive talent pool, like in the Boston area, especially for tech. You can assume that your candidate probably has several offers coming at any given time.
Awesome, yeah. We're going to close the poll here in just a second, but with that 3.6% unemployment rate, that's pretty big. So a little over half, we're looking at what, 65% there, that you face this challenge. So that's actually where we're going to start our conversation today, is with that speed. So Samantha, let's take a look at setting the scene. When I had the design team choose a background for this particular slide, I asked them to make something that was like a person putting makeup on or getting ready for a first date, because that's kind of like what we're doing in the interview process, is we're trying to look our best that we possibly can, right? And so instead we have this idea that they're getting ready for the first date. So you don't want to miss anything, you want everything to be perfect, and that's where things break down. So Samantha, tell us what we should do first as TA leaders when we want to make a great offer to that candidate and set the scene.
Sure. So I would say, as you mentioned, the most important thing is at each stage to always put your best foot forward. So what that means is getting the candidate to accept the offer. I would say it's the biggest hurdle. And a key to doing that is, as we just mentioned, getting that offer out quickly. And it looks like 35% of you aren't having a problem with that, which is already a big win. Second, you need to make sure you keep that new hire warm and their cool down period. So that's that awkward time between offer accepted and just starting, which is a pretty dangerous area to be in. Third, you need to improve the effectiveness of new employees ramping into their roles. And that isn't just, their orientation on day one. It's much more than that, which we'll go into shortly.
Great, Samantha. So thanks for running over the 3 ideas that we're gonna go through there, which is accepting the offer, keeping them warm, and improving the effectiveness. But one definition I want to break out here quick is difference between onboarding and orientation, which they're 2 really different ideas. Employee onboarding definition refers to any action that helps the employee acclimate to their new work environment, get acquainted with the company, the culture, connect to colleagues. They need to feel welcomed and valued, and that's what's going to help them become fully productive and bond with the company. Now, cross-boarding you can also throw in there, and cross-boarding is a term we use for people that are getting promotions, so they're joining new work groups, maybe new divisions. So you can parallel those 2 for the onboarding and cross-boarding. Orientation, on the other hand, is the first step or a step in onboarding. It's when the new hire learns the basics of their environment. So let's look at some percentages that are going to help you cross this bridge, because you may think this bridge is a short bridge and the employee's thinking it's a much longer bridge from being a candidate to being a fully committed employee. So 20% of your staff turnover will occur in the first 45 days or because of the first 45 days. So that's the number that's coming from SHRM. Now, Root Inc. gives a different stat, which I think is much more alarming for us that we need to look at, is 90% of your hires will decide to stay or leave within the first 6 months. So you have them for 5 months, but they're still not committed to you. So onboarding not only is that time beforehand, and we're actually going to rewind the conversation here from the 6 months, we're going to actually go back to that offer that you were talking about, Samantha, because that's really where the onboarding starts. So thinking about the offer, what are ways that we can increase that offer acceptance, Samantha?
Sure. I would say if you already are in the 90% range for offer acceptance, that's huge, and you're definitely on the right track there as well. But for those of us that maybe aren't there yet, I would say there's 2 main areas to focus on, and I'll break them down further. The first is specifically during that hiring process, and the second is during the offer stage. So if we back up to that hiring process first, you want to make sure that you have a really clear job description. This is not only going to help you get aligned internally, but it's also going to give your candidates an idea of what to expect throughout their hiring process, as well as what they'll do on the job. Next, you want to make sure that you have a lot of structure to your process. And again, this is both internally and externally. And this is going to make sure that both the people in talent acquisition and HR know what's expected of them, but also so your candidate knows what's going to be happening as well. Third, make sure you follow up early and often. And again, this goes both ways. Just like your candidates want to know if they've been accepted or moved along in a stage, people internally need to know what's happening with those candidates. So that way, if there's a step that they need to do, they can stay on track as well. If we go to the offer stage, which is the second main bucket I mentioned, you need to make sure that when you're ready to give that offer, you do it via phone. Keep it human. I think this is probably one of the much more exciting stages of being in talent acquisition and HR, is getting to welcome that awesome new person into your company. So make sure you take the 5 minutes and give them a quick call. After you've done that, make sure you keep that momentum going with a really positive and engaging offer letter. Obviously, there's parts of it that need to have legalese, and we're not saying to not do that, but when you write the actual email, there's no reason why you can't put a fun emoji or a GIF in there. That's actually how I built some of my personal brand at Workable, is I was the person who was always sending GIFs out to new hires. Next, when you've sent that offer letter and you're then going back and forth on salary, keep those negotiations human. It's a business problem, not a people problem. When your new hire who's talented and you really want them and they're good at what they do, don't blame them for advocating for themselves. That's actually a skill that's going to help in the long run at your company. Then fourth and final is something where I think it can be a little bit hard to do, and it comes back to alignment, is make sure anything that you can speed up or automate, you do so ahead of time, so that way you've gotten that offer out and the person's ready to accept, but you're not going, oh, wait, 1 moment, we need to do some paperwork quickly. That's just awkward for everyone. So make sure you thought of that ahead of time. Scott, have you ever had things like that happen?
Oh, absolutely. And I'm going to continue that conversation, but I want to rewind real quick back on what you were saying. Is a couple things was the experience with that emojis, like that's a brand piece. And what we forget about with HR is we're always worried about compliance, right? And we're always worried about scalability. And sometimes we forget about that human touch. So Samantha, that was some really good information on that. Let's continue the conversation at that point, right? So the new hire accepts that and they're transitioning from that talent acquisition moment to that talent management moment, right? This is where we're kind of doing that handoff. And you have to make sure that that handoff is frictionless, because what you don't want the new hire to do is drop off into the abyss.
Yep.
And you want to make sure that where talent acquisition stops, talent management picks up. And I wanted to, for the audience, I wanted to play the song Danger Zone here, but for licensing purposes, I can't. So we're going to call it the cooling off period, is that moment of, yes, I'll take the job, to day 1, day 5, but really that 14-day period prior to start. In the United States, 14 days, 2-week notice. Other countries are 30 days and 60 days. So you have to figure out what are you going to do in that time frame to keep them engaged. So Samantha, how do we define the right roles and responsibilities between talent acquisition and talent management to keep this employee hot and turned on for the company?
Great question. I would say that this probably varies based on each company, but there's a few guidelines you can use. The first being is to clarify those responsibilities. So you want to make sure that you're not duplicating efforts or someone isn't assuming that you'll do something when you're not. And this can be really basic. It could be a checklist, a shared Google Doc, or even using your favorite piece of software. Next, make sure that once you've taken care of all that clerical work, you're doing everything you can to keep the employee hot. And this is kind of the stuff I'm more familiar with. In fact, I can give a recent example from Workable. We had 2 new SDRs that were hired in March, but weren't able to start for several weeks. Knowing, as you mentioned, this is a really volatile time and it's easy to have employee churn before they even walk in the door. We made sure that our 2 new hires were speaking to sales leadership before they started. And then rather than having their swag bag on their desk day 1, we actually sent it to their homes. And this is a way for them to feel engaged, feel really welcome, and also, rep our cool Workable gear before walking in the door.
That's a really good idea with that swag bag idea going to the home. I did a webinar about 2 weeks ago with one of my clients. It's a large insurance company nationwide, and Nationwide is not the insurance company. It's a nationwide insurance company. They were talking about how they sent the swag bags to people's homes, and it was about $30 a box that they were sending out. So it was a very low cost piece in order to get items to go home. So the family, which I'm going to talk about social circle in a second, was engaged. So that's a really good idea with the swag.
Exactly. And I think something I'm wondering is, do you have experience of what happens when you don't keep these new hires engaged?
Right. That's a good piece. Is that same client, that large insurance company, they made a comment to me about how it was a little bit different for them, or their onboarding became different when this comment they got from a new hire. They were telling me that there's this one employee that told them that they got offered the job, they took it, they said yes, and the recruiter from that company stopped calling them, which makes sense, right? I took the offer, so why does the recruiter keep calling? But they said there's 2 other recruiters I was working with continually called me for the next 2 weeks. And were telling me, we can find you another job. I have another client who's very interested in you. If it doesn't work out, we have a spot for you. And continually called them for 2 weeks telling them that. Including they called them on their first day, at the end of their first day, saying, hey, how was it? Were they ready for you? Can you see yourself there? Is that the kind of culture you want to be part of? So they've been sowing doubt in this person for 2 weeks. And at the end of the first day, when the company wasn't quite ready for them, right, because it's onboarding, things get missed, which we shouldn't accept that. They said that was the moment I decided to leave the company.
And so actually to your point, that happened to me when I first moved to Boston. Is I got this exciting new job and I walked in and they weren't ready for me. Nothing was on my desk, but my hiring manager wasn't even there that day. And mercifully at lunch, I happened to get 2 offers for different companies. And you better believe that was my first and last day in that office. And I took a counter offer.
It's funny because I have a coworker who got flown out to Manhattan for her first day, and boss wasn't ready, no computer. So she went shopping for the day.
Nice.
So yeah, you think that these are isolated incidences, but they're pretty commonplace that you have to be ready for people. So one thing to remember, so if you're making a note, is remember that the only recruiter that stops calling your new hire after the offer is your recruiter. So what are you going to do during that cooling off period that you can be ready for them? So let's talk about some of those things that you need to worry about or help get through for the cooling off. Is remember the social circle that's around that new hire. they're pulling them away. So that's family, significant others, friends. 50% of people that take a job get counter-offered by their current employer. So you want to make sure that whatever you're doing is going to remove that cognitive dissonance that's being introduced by that social circle. This is that danger zone, right? I'm sure that song's playing in some people's heads at this point. You want to make sure that that doesn't fall apart at this point. So let's take a little bit over to the interns that you were talking about earlier. They accept you intern them, you train them, they're intellectual property now, and they have a semester of college to get through before they join you. So what are you doing to message that intern for those months that they're at college and to make sure that they're ready for you? That's a really long cooling off period. So think about onboarding as reflecting the culture of your company and your communication style. The way you onboard associates is the way they're going to expect to work every day. So if you don't talk to them, they're going to think your company doesn't have a social bond, that they have no personal value, that they're just a widget to get a job done because you don't talk to them. If you email them a bunch of PDFs, or all you do is email, they're going to say, one, this company hides behind email. Two, they're giving me PDFs to fill out. They're in the Stone Ages. They're not with technology today. Why not? Can't this be like Amazon where it's just one click? I mean, their career site was pretty easy. So you gotta make sure that you have all that technology or that face of the interaction going well. And then also on day one, I'm guilty of this where I've said to people in the first week, oh, don't worry, it's your first week, we'll get that handled. But when we give that excuse too many times in onboarding. So make sure it's not a manual process, make sure that everything's on their desk. And we're gonna talk about memorable moments in just a little bit. So Samantha, when you and I were saying, okay, that's more like pre-boarding, like the slide here says, is onboarding is what people are always using the term. I kind of think about that time before day one is pre-boarding. But we said, okay, now is day one, and we want to chunk out what onboarding was. And we discussed, you look at onboarding as weeks 1 and 2, and you're answering the question, what should you do? Right, so how do I fit in? By day 30, what should have been done? How should I be reflecting myself? And by day 60 to 90 is more that tactical, where should I be at this point? So do you still agree with chunking it out that way?
I do, and based on our conversation we had earlier, I did a little bit of digging on Workable's job board, and I found one of our current customers did an excellent example of setting these expectations for what you can do at each stage of hiring, but also more importantly to your point now, which is what you would do your first 30 days, 60, and 90. So this is all stuff that you should know before you're hiring someone anyways, so why not share it in your job description and your hiring process? This is, I think, also going to give you more meaningful conversations in your process, and then also just remove a lot of anxiety for your new hires.
I'm going to jump in on your.
Oh, yes, please.
I have again, a client that I did a webinar back a couple of weeks ago where they were talking about core values that they want people to reflect during the job. And they went and say, okay, let's put that in our interview process. And to your point of what to expect, 30, 60, 90, they actually put those into their job description. So just like you're saying,
great, yeah.
Yeah, where are you supposed to be? What's the environment going to be? So from the very get-go, like you're saying, is they can see that all the way through the whole process.
Exactly, and I think it's a nice way too, putting in that little bit of effort will give you much more meaningful conversations, and I think take out some of the repetition within those interviews and make it just a better process for everyone involved. And I think you'd be surprised the results you'll get from making simple changes like that. Speaking of changes, we've actually updated our onboarding program here at Workable, and I thought I would use this as an example to illustrate those 30, 60, 90. So, we're talking about making these programs and how to use them, but I want to get a little bit more granular because it's a pretty daunting thing to do. So as context, we recently got funding and our CEO told me, so we need to double the size of our company and we don't have a corporate onboarding program. Can you figure this out? And as I'm sweating bullets, I'm like, yeah, sure, Nikos, I can do that, I guess. So when I thought about this, I obviously engaged our HR team, knowing that they were going to be instrumental in this because they know our company better than anyone. And as we're sitting in a room brainstorming what this program is going to look like, the first thing we decided to do to launch this program was to work backwards from our goals and limitations. So knowing that we didn't have a set budget for this and we couldn't add on to anyone's ramp time or the time it would take them to start doing meaningful work, it was a pretty heavy task, especially knowing that we were hiring two very different groups, specifically a lot of people in sales and the people I normally work with, and a lot of people on the product side. So very different learning styles, people that are typically more introverted versus highly extroverted and hands-on. So we're like, okay, how are we going to manage these groups? So once we figured out how we wanted to work with them and accommodate those learning styles, we realized, well, wait a minute, this is really two-pronged. We need to onboard the existing company to these new people as well. So that actually took on the form of being newsletters to the company. And we cheekily call them Yes to the Desk internally. And this shows people's faces, where they'll be located, and what they're doing. And it's a nice way to give those new hires a shout out their first day as well and make them feel welcome. And then I would...
Let's just say one thing that we're doing here at Clickboarding is the same idea, is we get a picture and 3 fun facts and circulate those so people have that personal connection, right?
Love
And
a good
we
fun
always
fact.
think that we always think that onboarding or a piece of technology is going to solve our problem within HR. And I just want to highlight for the audience, you keep using the term program, right? Because it's an onboarding program, which has to sit on top of technology. But the points that we're going over here is that program, that thread, and we're going to come back to repeatability or scalability of a program. So I just want to make sure as you're taking notes, you can preserve that for later when we actually talk about scalability.
Exactly, and that's a good clarification. Everything I'm talking about now was done by human work and not with really a dedicated software outside of course, our own system. And then I would say the final thing to do, because this again was pretty daunting, is we realized that we just had to launch it. You're never going to get a perfect program until you start getting it. So release that minimum viable program, and already you're going to have a better experience than you did before. Now, Scott, I actually wanted to ask, do you do anything to really personalize this to your team? Because you've been hinting at that a bit. Can you elaborate there for us and how we can make our programs more human?
Well, one of the things that making more human, some people call it cheesy. I'm I guess the king of dad jokes or dad comments here around the office. So cheesy is one way of saying it, but I want to say more memorable moments, right? So the idea is not to be over the top, but let them know that you're prepared for them and that this is the culture of our company. So one thing that you want to look at is scheduling events or items that can be placed strategically and checked up on that is sustainable. So we're talking about moments and items and make it sustainable. You don't have to do all of these at once. I'm going to give you some ideas that you can prioritize and put in action and roll out. So one of the things at Thomson Reuters that I was given to do is this onboarding idea, and I looked at what needed to be happening, and we had 49% turnover in the call center I had. By putting some of these items in place, it's a little bit more than what I'm going to go through here, but we drove it down to 8%, and we held it there for a year and a half. Productivity went up 20%, and my recruiting department didn't like us very much because they had to stop recruiting for 3 months because we had the bench so full that they couldn't place anybody into the organization because nobody was leaving.
That's a great problem to have, though.
Right. So the idea is you look at that minimum viable product that you were talking about, right? That idea, and then you scale from there. So first thing to do is look at your key performance indicators, right? You need to be driving after that. We talked about putting those into your into your job description and driving from there. But I say the next best thing to do, so you've got that done, is plan lunch and tell them what they're going to be doing for lunch, right? So now that question that they have and they're coming into day one, this is part of the program, is do I bring a sack lunch? Who am I going to be sitting with? And you can create a memorable moment or memorable conversation. You were talking about conversations with senior leadership. Mm-hmm. It could be that. It could be simply their work group, right? Second thing is have a welcome item on their desk. So here's something you can do for the sales department is go buy a case of 100 grand bars and print up a bunch of letters that say, we can't wait to make your first can't wait for you to make your first 100 grand here. It's a very love that. Yeah. Salespeople, they're gonna drive after that, and it's very scalable. I can just put that out, and that's a memorable moment. They're gonna go home. You see this happen every once in a while on LinkedIn. People post a picture of the swag that's on their desk. It's a huge idea. Another idea is Smarties. You can get a bag of Smarties. Letter says that we're all smarter because you joined the team, so you can put those items out. We already know about the swag, like the T-shirts and the Padfolio. They say that's out of my budget. Smarties aren't already a budget. 100 grand bars aren't out of your budget. And they mean a lot. But simply, having office supplies at the desk goes a long ways. You'll hear about companies that say, well, we just take the new hire to the office supply closet because they need to know where to get supplies, and we let them pick their supplies for the first day. To me, as a new hire, that's saying, you weren't ready for me, and this is your way around of not being ready for me. So you want to make sure that there's simple things like that. So third, what we want to do is walk through the first day. So this is going to be a little bit higher level. Walk through their day interaction by interaction. So do the new hires have a designated space up front to park for their first day? So being at Thomson Reuters, the campus I was on was so big that they actually have buses during the wintertime in order to ship you in from the back of the parking lots. So it was a very big facility. And what you want to do is those new hires, where are they supposed to park? What's that first day supposed to be like? Make a spot up front, whatever that looks like for your organization. Maybe you have a cone that you put out for a new hire first day or whatever it is. But think about from the moment of parking and then them walking in. Does your office suite, that's what your organization is, does it have a welcome sign with their name on the outside of the door? That's what we do at Clickboarding because we are a secure facility. So then they walk up to before they ring the doorbell, they see that their name is there and that we're ready for them.
That's a great touch.
Yeah, and people, we get comments about that all the time. The next thing is, how do you greet them? You know they're showing up at 8:30. Are you coming out at 8:35 to greet them? So taking a look at these items that you're ready for. How about badging? So like I said, I used to onboard 30 to 40 associates into my 2 divisions every 2 weeks. So I would go down to the front, so lots of people in the lobby, and I take them all over to security, and we spend the next half hour printing badges. And what if there was a technical difficulty, and then that one person didn't get their badge, and it'll be like a week before we can get security to figure that out. So why not get that done ahead of time? You know that they're coming. You're able to get a picture of them if you have a picture badge. You can get all this stuff done ahead of time during that pre-boarding phase, which is also touching the new hire, letting them know that you're excited and ready for them. So think about all those little pieces. Do you have a welcome reception ready for them? On LinkedIn, you see people with those high five tunnels, right? They come through the first day. That one may be a little bit harder to orchestrate because it's more than 1 or 2 people. But what are you doing for welcome reception? We do a bagel reception here at Click for my teams that I oversee. I don't come in with Einstein bagels and put down 2 boxes and say, this is your welcome reception. I actually have my white platters. I tell my wife, bring our white platters to work. And I have my white platters with a tablecloth on the table, and it's bagels. But it's just that little bit of difference, that little bit of care that lets them know that they're respected and they're expected anywhere from an SDR role all the way up through a senior sales executive, right? A senior sales executive or an executive in your organization, you might want to do an omelet bar, which I know costs more money, but think about what that's saying to that executive, because this is a 6-figure, highly paid individual. You spent a lot of work with a headhunter trying to get them in the door. It shows your commitment to them when you do that level of a reception. It also shows to all the people around them that this is our commitment to this person we're bringing in from the outside.
Exactly,
right?
And it really isn't hard to do those finishing touches as well. It's very easy, low-hanging fruit.
Exactly, and it sets the tone for the day, for the week. When that recruiter calls at the end of the day and says, hey, how were they? Were they ready for you? They're gonna say, absolutely not. This company has it dialed in for me, right? So this should be a schedule it and forget it type program where you have a repeatable, compliant onboarding experience. So you want to make sure that you're focusing on the experience. You do need to revisit the program or the items in these checklists every 3 weeks. I'm sorry, 3 months. 3 weeks is too often. Every 3 months or so, in order to make sure that you have the right items in there and they're being executed. So minimum viable product to go to market. And then are you executing on the minimum viable product? And if not, why not? Bagels are super easy to pick up. So if you're not executing on picking up bagels, why not? Can we find something different? Can we have them delivered? Something different. So the next level up that I would say for a program that you could initiate would be a mentor program. So you probably have some sort of a mentor program now. But if you could institute it during pre-boarding, so that mentor calls a person during the pre-boarding time and says, I'm going to be taking you through day 1. I'm going to be the one meeting you at the front. I'm going to be the one walking you through your first day. It's going to change, and it's going to create that buddy at work, which we all have seen the research over the years about. I have a best friend at work. They're more likely to stay. You're doing that at the pre-boarding time. Bottom line, you want people raving about your program, about the pre-boarding time frame, about the onboarding time frame. You want to create those memorable moments that people rave about. And Samantha, I'm sure you've heard people rave about your program.
I have actually, and I did bring a quote from our onboarding program to our webinar today. So I think it's easy to get in the weeds of these details of how we make things matter and how we should build these programs, but we need to remember the why we're doing this, why we love our jobs, why we like to bring on these talented people. And this is from one of the first people that went through this program. We've now had 70 people go through it. But this person said from their first day, because we did this little bit of thought, they felt like their opinion mattered, we were invested in them, and that they could get their job done. And really, I don't think we could have a better outcome from a program. So that was a huge win for us.
Yeah, that's awesome. So we're getting to a point where we can do some review, and I'm sure the audience has a lot of takeaways. Let's run over some of the takeaways that I have, and you can add some. Is make sure this to set the scene. So going back to that very beginning point where we were talking about that offer, making sure that you have a process to create a nice offer that you can get it out the door. There's a quick approval process. We talk about how it's getting delivered via phone, in-person offer. So you have that piece. The next is don't let the candidate cool off, right? You don't want to enter the danger zone, that 14-day time period without a plan. So how are you communicating to them? And at this point is where you need scalability. So I know you're going to talk to that point, so I'm going to leave that for you. You want to communicate and follow through on those transition points. We talked about weeks 1 and 2, what should you do by day 30, what should you have done, and by day 60 to 90, where should they be? You're communicating those to them, and you have markers or checkpoints at that during that onboarding time. How about you, Samantha? What takeaways do you have?
I really liked yours, but there's a few that I would add to them. The first being is that make sure you have your roles for your HR and talent acquisitions teams defined, so that way there is a seamless line of communication and you know exactly what you should be doing throughout your entire hiring and then onboarding process. And then, as you mentioned, on top of making your program repeatable and scalable, just launch it. Don't be afraid. We had a bit of trepidation here, and after a certain point, I was like, it's not going to get any better until we do it. And from there, it's taken off in leaps and bounds. And I would say that's the biggest hurdle, is just getting it done.
Yep. I want to just spend some time on that scalability piece there, because most people, they hear people say, I'm drinking from the fire hose day one. I'm drinking from the fire hose for the first few days. And one of the items when we're talking about scalability, or how much of this can you bite off, you might say, how much can the new hire actually bite off? And one of the items to address is, what are you doing day one? If they're picking out insurance, if they're filling out a bunch of forms, doing that kind of stuff day one, that's where their mind is they're trying to think about, what insurance am I picking? Where's my bank account going? Then that's what they're thinking about. So if you can get that into pre-boarding, or get that all taken care of, so on day one, they're engaging with culture, not process or paperwork, that they're engaging with culture, not checklists. That's what we're talking about with building a program. So what are you doing during that pre-boarding time frame? How are you creating memorable moments for day one based on what you did in pre-boarding? How are you creating memorable moments on that 30, 60, and 90 days?
Exactly.
So that's the bulk of our main session. One of the things, if you want to take a look, for those who are taking notes, is in the chat box. There has been content being placed in there with links to different articles. So you can go ahead and you can copy those out and put those into your notes to help you along with some action items. But we also have questions and answers. So Erin, I'm going to toss it over to you to do some questions and answers for us.
Great, thanks, Scott. So I'm going to read off the first question, and I hope you guys have enjoyed the webinar so far. If you've liked what Scott and Samantha have to say, you might like how clipboarding and Workable can help you. So while I ask the first question, I'm also going to launch a poll. Let us know if you'd like to have a chat with our teams and see how we might be able to help you with closing great candidates or onboarding them. So the first question we have from the audience is, what is a best practice around giving deadlines for candidates responding to an offer? For example, offer expires in 3 days, etc.
Scott, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, so definitely want to be putting, so my opinion is, you definitely want to be putting a time frame on the offer acceptance. The deal is, you should never have a time frame on there that they can't meet. So a deadline that they can't meet to respond, if they can't respond to it, is probably a technology problem, that they weren't able to sign the PDF or item like that. So my opinion is, yes, have a time frame on there. 3 days is typically what I have. But if they can't meet that, you have a bigger problem with engagement if they can't meet that time frame. Samantha, did you have an opinion on that?
That's actually what I was going to say. So as someone who's more frequently been on the candidate side, when people are really pushing me for an offer and to sign, it like actually freaks me out a bit because I'm like, okay, what's really happening at this company when we talked about my time frame would be X and you're changing it now? So just be wary of pushing people too far and really work that expectation into your process from the beginning.
Yeah, I guess Samantha, to that point is if you say, hey, I'm going to extend you the offer. I have to get a few other things staged and ready for you, and we're trying to go for that Monday start date. So are you able to get this signed and back to me in the next 72 hours? Is that good? And you're asking it in that format versus, all right, I'm going to offer you this job and you have 48 hours to accept it. It's
exactly. So the way you phrased it's totally fine. I actually had a recruiter here in Boston try to bully me into signing a letter, and thankfully I didn't because it was really indicative of the culture. But yes, as long as you're really respectful of that and understanding that this is a huge decision for your candidate, you should be just fine.
Awesome.
Great.
Aaron,
thanks, guys. Yeah, we have a couple more questions here. So the first is somebody's from a large organization and they want to know how they would implement a pre-boarding or onboarding program like you're talking about. Since you guys are both from pretty small companies, how would this work at a larger organization?
Sure. So the one thing I would add that might be useful for them is that even though Workable isn't too many people, we have deployed this program across the US, UK, and Greece. So it was no small feat. And again, doing that really comes down to planning a tremendous amount and really engaging with all your stakeholders. So before I launched this program, I had to realize that I needed to speak with every VP at the company. So when I said, hey, I'm going to take your new hire for the first half of every day for their first week, they knew why. And they realized, oh, this actually is making my life easier. So it comes down to really just planning a bit more and understanding that your timelines might have to shift a bit. And again, as long as you communicate that, we didn't have any problems. And I would say it's probably the same for a larger company.
Yeah, so I've sat in ADP and in Thomson Reuters where we did a shift like this, and it wasn't global because those are both global organizations, but they were large division, which could parlay into the large company idea. Is you have to have somebody who sits over talent acquisition and talent management to be able to see how this plays against the two organizations and say, we're going to go forward with onboarding, and this is going to be our desired outcome. And that was where I was at. Is our desired outcome was to drive down. It was strictly just drive down attrition, right? And that was our one thing that we were looking at. So we figured out what we need to do and got the sponsor, somebody who was over talent acquisition, talent management. It was a director. And then we put the program together and brought it to them. And they said, this is what you want to do. You have a 6-month time period to get it launched. And we picked out just our minimum viable product. And as we did that minimum viable product, it showed the turnover reduced. So then we got more resources. We got able to purchase technology in order to keep that process going and drive further efficiency. So
exactly. Using data, I would say, is going to help you tremendously in showing that there's a concrete end goal that's going to boost your company's bottom line. That tends to get a lot of buy-in.
Right. It's hard to show in our realm in HR. It's hard to show ROI because it's soft dollars. It's people's time. So this is the desired goal. Is and this is my clients do every day. This is when I'm talking to a client. This is what they're trying to launch. This is what they're trying to go forward with. So some of my clients have said that this is the idea of the culture that we're trying to represent from a people side. So if you have a chief people officer, that's a really great sponsor to have for a program like this. But you need a sponsor who has a goal, a vision where the organization wants to get to that you can drive the program against. So my advice is get a sponsor that will let you put a program in place around culture.
Good tip for sure.
Thanks, guys. We have another question here. Somebody said, what should an onboarding process look like for promotions or for people who switch teams versus, like we were talking about here, new hires?
Good question. So something that we've done internally is obviously this person already knows your company and they're quite successful if they're making that lateral or especially promotion. So don't overthink it. Just ask them, or not ask them, but think to yourself, what does this person need to be successful? Really engage with their existing manager and then their new one. So that way there's no confusion across teams. But for the most part, it's usually a pretty quick program, at least with what we've seen here. But again, the hardest thing is just getting it going and understanding what everyone needs for that to work.
Yeah, I'm going to take an approach from a larger nation level. These are probably promotions of management, and you're now investing into this person. So you have two things to worry about: is probably relocation and paperwork compliance, right? HR, we love paperwork. So you have to do something there, and you want to get that out of the way with the person because they're already an employee and they're not going to expect that. So how do you get that minimized and out of the way, and focus on relocation package or new office culture? So you want to take a look at how do you build a process around this is the culture what you're stepping into, this is the person that you're replacing, and these are the cultures of the company, which I think, Samantha, ties back to what you were talking about with the job offers. This is what to expect in the 30, 60, 90 day, and we were talking about core competencies or core cultural values that you want that person to display. This is also one that I would heavily say you need a 30, 60, and a 90 day check-in or temperature check with, because again, it's probably more of a senior level person because they're getting promoted, and you need to make sure that they have all the tools, they have the resources, and they're having the conversations. So whoever is above that person, or maybe 2 levels above that promotion, has on their schedule a 30-day check-in with them to make sure they have the right tools for their team and that culturally they feel like they're fitting in.
Definitely. And something that I actually kind of want to pull out from what you're saying is you've done a lot of this for new hires already. So work smarter, not harder. Reuse all those really good things that you've already done and just apply them to this. It'll be parsed down and a bit different, but a lot of the components are going to be the same.
Yeah, so this is where, Samantha, you're highlighting is you have a technology to support it or system to support it. The program is going to look just a little bit different because of the person. Mm-hmm. Yep. Good questions.
Awesome.
What else we got, Erin?
We have another one here. So what other things can we do during the cool down period to stay in touch without annoying the candidate?
Oh, good caveat. Scott?
So I'm thinking about the younger generation. Text messaging is a good one to be able to stay in touch with somebody every 3 days or so, and it's relevant to what's upcoming. So you have only 14 days here that you're touching them during. So if you touch them 3 times, it's not really that often. And I would want to do something that's relevant to their workspace also. So a video or pictures or something about the culture. If I'm more of a white collar position and I'm thinking about a corporate campus, is I'd let them answer questions to me saying, here's all the things that are going on, what questions do you have? And based on their questions, I'll provide them answers about their first day. So you already know that they're worried about start time and end time. You already know they're interested about insurance. So you can take all that stuff out of the way. But what about the biking club that you have? What about the diversity club that you have? What about these other things that you have? Do they have opportunity to ask about it ahead of time? Because other recruiters are telling them about these programs at their company, and they're looking at other career sites that have this on there. What are you doing to continue to message to them during that period?
Exactly. And the only thing I would add there is, emphasizing that there is that open line of communication. There have been times where I wasn't sure if I could reach out to a company I just joined, but that wasn't an issue here at Workable. So I did send quite a few emails back and forth with our recruiter as well as our HR manager. And for me personally, it removed a tremendous amount of stress just getting some of those basic questions answered and starting that paperwork. And really, that was all I needed to stay engaged. So it can be really simple stuff as well.
Yeah, so just going to break it down to action on this. Write down what you want to do. If you want 3 emails to go out, you can can those emails such that they look relevant, like personalized. So you can make them so they look personalized. But how are you going to get those sent out on that time period, right? So now your recruiter's like asking you to do more work. Or text messaging. How can you make sure text messages go out on a relevant time period? I love the idea of a text message on the morning of the person starts saying, we're excited to have you, can't wait to see you in a few hours. Love that idea. But we have to think about scalability of that communication, and a phone call goes a long way.
Definitely.
Thanks, guys. So I have another one here. This person's wondering, how does an onboarding process handle reinforcement of company core values / culture? Because obviously the process being discussed here is soft reinforcement.
Sure. So to give like an actual example, what we do at Workable is on a candidate's first day, or not a candidate, new hire's first day, Their first section is actually learning about our company's culture and values. And this is done with a slide deck, but we actually talk to them, we ask them questions, and we walk through our company's entire history. So I would say that's like a firmer touch point. It's not just something that's sent in an email. It's like, nope, we're going to sit here for an hour and talk about who we are, what we do, and why we're passionate. And that's gone a long way. And that actually tends to get at least our sales team super excited.
I think one of the things that we were talking about is those values that you bring all the way back into the job posting. So one of my clients was, when they were looking at their values, there are 6 of them that they have, and they put those 6 values in the job posting. One of them was we are a highly dynamic environment, meaning we change a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So they put that in the job posting so that when the person went through the interview process and they were told, you know, we're in a very high pace, high change environment, it wasn't a surprise. So when the person started, it wasn't a surprise. So Samantha, you were talking about day 1 and some presentations. I believe it actually starts back at that job description. Now, during that 14-day cooling off period, that first week, you had to continue that messaging. So how do you do that? I have another client that has named their program iStart. So like a little letter I, like iPhone,
Mm-hmm.
iPod, a little bit of play on that. But it has elements about I belong, I'm ready, I'm valued, and they build their whole pillars around that. So that every time that they're touching something, the managers are seeing that messaging. The mentors are seeing that messaging. You have to make them feel like they belong, and you're doing this to make them belong. So not only to the candidate does that messaging have to continue, but also internally to the company.
Good point. Any more questions, Erin?
Yeah, we have a couple here. So one is from somebody consistently struggling to get their team to sign off in a timely manner on offer letters. So they're wondering, how do I speed that up?
I'll let you do that, Samantha. There's probably a more.
I mean, I don't want to plug Workable, but you can a little bit. I mean, that is something that our tool would help you do. But also, just from a project manager standpoint, just be, politely persistent. That's the only way I was able to lift this program, was just pinging people until they did what I needed them to do, and it worked. But Scott, I think you probably have much more relevant examples than that.
Well, there's 2 pieces here. Is begin with the end in mind. So if you're going to give an offer, what is your process to give the offer? So when I've taken a look at this with clients, it more so was we didn't know the path to hire. And that was, they had ready to make the offer, who's got to give all the approvals? And so begin with the end in mind. How are you going to lay that out? There was another problem that I've seen consistently is compliance. Is the reason for the approvals is because they had the ability to edit a Word document, or they had so many different decisions that they could make that they had to get the approvals to make sure everybody had made the right decisions. So can you lock down that offer so that they can only edit certain areas, so that you have a legally compliant offer that does not need to be reviewed by as many eyes in order to get that out quickly? And then the last part is this has to be owned by the recruiter or talent acquisition. Is I'm about to make this offer, so before I make the offer, maybe 3 days from now, we're getting to the end point, check to make sure everybody's in the office. Check to make sure everybody who's in that approval flow is there in order to make that approval. Those are the 3 things.
Great. So somebody else is wondering about losing candidates during the cooling off period. So he's wondering if you guys have had this happen to you, or if you've seen any data on this. I know in this presentation we talked more about how the engagement during the cooling off period is really to make sure that by day 1 they're not questioning their decision, more to reinforce. Would you guys agree with that?
Yep.
Scott, do you want to start?
Yeah, so the statistic, the blended statistic is 4% of people don't show up for their first day. So that's the blended statistic. Yesterday, I was at a company that had 46% of people that started the onboarding process didn't come through until the end. So
Wow.
They only had 54% completion. So I've had clients that do 50% completion. So it is an industry piece too, because I have clients that are anything from warehouse workers, movie theaters, white collar professionals. So they're all a little bit different. And you want to look at why. And Samantha, you talk about the friction. one of the things is your process so hard that I can go drive Uber easier, right? So what is it that they could do instead of, and you want to remove all that friction that you possibly can to start. So those are the statistics that I have. Is there anything you wanted to add for that, Samantha?
No, I was just going to say friction's the big one, and just be politely tenacious and be super excited and super happy to have them, and just be the best place that they would want to work at.
Yeah. Oh, I got a good one. So there's a client that I had about 1.5 years ago who their property management and they're hiring a janitorial staff and security guards. And that their problem was getting people to start, right? You could go drive Uber, Lyft, or these other jobs, or work for me. And they were able to, when the person comes to the janitor's closet to get hired, right, they're able to drop a text message to the person's phone. The person's able to onboard themselves right there, take them up, and go to work. So you got to think about what is the role, what do you need to do, and what's a little amount of friction that you put in place in order to get that person actionable on the job.
I like that efficiency. That really speaks to me as a project manager.
Well, each individual new hire is a project. Begin with the end in mind. How are you going to do that?
Awesome. On that note, we're going to wrap it up now. I just want to let everybody know that we will be sending out the recording and slides afterwards, so you can revisit all of these pearls of wisdom from Samantha and Scott. So thank you everybody for joining. I hope you join us for the next one. Check out Workable and Clickboarding if you'd like. And for those of you who just decided you wanted a demo, we will be following up shortly. So thanks and have a great day, guys.
Thanks, Scott.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Samantha.
Bye.